Welcome to the Sunday morning sermon for September the 4th, 2022. Hope you're enjoying the long weekend. This is the Sunday morning sermon for Black Rock Baptist Church. We've been looking at a short series of messages on total forgiveness, and this is the final message in this series, the final step of blessing your enemies. It's based upon Luke chapter 6, verses 27 to 36. Let me read that for you this morning. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To the one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other cheek as well. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do also unto them. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? Even sinners do the same thing. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good, and lend expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful even as your Father is merciful. Love your enemies. That may well be the most difficult thing that Jesus ever said. Even when we hear it in church, it's an extremely difficult thing for us to believe that Jesus really means what he says. But in case you have any doubts about this, let's consider the way this command is explained. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. And if that's not enough, Jesus gives us some examples so we can't weasel or squirm our way out of this particular truth. We can ignore what Jesus says if we want to, but we can't deny that he said it. If someone strikes you, turn the other cheek. If they take your shirt, give them your jacket too. If a beggar comes to you, give him something. If someone steals your money, don't demand it back. Then we have Luke's version of the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. And Jesus anticipates our objection here. We object and say, well, Lord, you know I love people who love me. Frank Burns on the TV show MASH, he said, it's nice to be nice to nice people. Sure it is. But that doesn't win any points with the Lord. Even sinners are nice to nice people. Then, like any good preacher, Jesus repeats his main point just in case we haven't gotten it yet. Love your enemies. Be willing for others to take advantage of you. Don't go around thinking that you deserve something in return. That's not why you forgive other people, and that's not why you love your enemies. After all, you might forgive someone who's a jerk, and there's likely going to be a jerk after you forgive them. You may love your enemies, and they'll still be your enemies tomorrow, maybe. Well, let's just stop here for a moment and realize that these are truly radical sayings of Jesus. A man once commented to me that everything the world teaches us about human relationships is quite wrong. Compared to what most of us have heard, these words of Jesus are literally out of this world. That is, they come from another place altogether. If we take these words seriously, and we should, we'll often find ourselves at odds with the conventional wisdom most people take for granted. Why, then, should we ever live this way? What's in it for us? Jesus gives us two answers to those questions. Why should we live this way? Well, first of all, you'll receive a great reward. I think he primarily means a great reward in heaven, but there are also great rewards in this life when we love our enemies. Perhaps the greatest reward is that by loving our enemies, we are set free from bitterness and from anger. Love and hate cannot coexist in the same place at the same time. If we love our enemies, we will not hate them. It's really as simple as that. You will receive a great reward. Secondly, we should live this way because then you will demonstrate that you are truly a child of God. God specializes in being kind to the unkind and showing mercy to mean people. He specializes in showering his grace upon sinners, and he loves to turn enemies into friends. When we love our enemy, we're showing forth the character of God to the world and proving that we are indeed part of God's family. There ought to be a family resemblance that everyone can clearly recognize. That's why the text ends with these words, "Be merciful even as your Father is merciful." Did you get that? Your Father. If we say that God is our Father, then we have an obligation to show forth his character to the world. And what better way to do it than by the way we treat our enemies? That leads us to a very practical question. Who are my enemies? In the broadest sense, an enemy is anyone who turns against me. The dictionary defines an enemy as one who feels hatred toward, intends to injure, or opposes the interests of another. It's important as we think about what Jesus said that we will not restrict the term enemy to people like the Hitlers, the Husseins, the Bin Ladens of the world. They were certainly enemies of many nations, but these men are not my personal enemies. My personal enemies tend to be much closer to home. In fact, home is the place to look for your enemies. Jesus himself said, "A man's enemies will be the members of his own household." Matthew 10:36. In that very passage, he specified those family relationships that sometimes go sour, a father and son relationship, a mother-daughter relationship, a father-in-law and a son-in-law relationship. We can easily move on from that list to other close relationships, including parent-child, husband-wife, on to grandparents and uncles and aunts, and then to various distant relatives. The enemies we are told to love usually are not people who live far away in faraway countries. Most of us will never visit those countries. But we do have to go home every day and face people who may or may not be glad to see us. Every week we work with people who maybe we dislike them or they dislike us. We may even come to church and see people we'd rather not see. So let's just think on these three categories of home, work, and church. That's where many of our enemies will be found. Pastor James Thornhill tells how after pastoring or after preaching a message on forgiveness, he received a very honest email from someone who had read the printed version of his sermon. He says, "I have never met this person, and as far as I know, the writer has never attended our church." Here's part of the email. He writes, "I am in the depths of unrelenting and what appears to be immovable unforgiveness due to serious wrongs and abuse committed against me by a very close friend who is also a believer. I have read anew the forgiveness scriptures. I've been receiving counsel. I have bought all the books on forgiveness, but nothing has touched my heart and my spirit and my understanding like your message. Even as I write, I'm crying, as I know that God is calling me to forgive this person for his sake, even as he has forgiven me. And as I do, as I stop dwelling on the pain and the hurt of it all, the years of anger and bitterness and resentment begin to subside in me." Those words have the ring of truth about them. Christians can hurt each other deeply and repeatedly. Sometimes we do it deliberately. Our feet are made of clay because we too are sinners. In a fallen world, the people we thought we could trust will often let us down. Sometimes the people we love the most will turn against us. And sometimes it will happen over and over again, and we'll discover that our loved ones have become our enemies. Let's be more specific. Your children could be your enemies. Your husband could be your enemy. Your wife could be your enemy. Your parents could be your enemies, because it isn't just people way out there somewhere. Nameless faces, anonymous evil people who are our enemies. Sooner or later, people we love will hurt us deeply, and at that point, and for at least that moment, we have become their enemies too. That's why these words of Jesus are so difficult. We are being instructed to love people very close to us who have hurt us very deeply. We are to love those who spitefully use us and abuse us and victimize us over and over again. Let me tell you, it's not easy to do in any situation, but it's even harder to love when we feel deeply and repeatedly violated and our trust has been destroyed. Yet the command remains, love your enemies. We cannot escape it. This is the final step in forgiveness. We have not totally forgiven until we can bless those who have hurt us so deeply. To say it another way, we cannot be set free until we set them free to be blessed by the Lord. R.T. Kendall said, "You must totally forgive them, release them, and you will be set free." So the question then becomes both personal and practical. How do we love our enemies? How do we do that? I have a few suggestions to make. How do we love our enemies? Number one, greet them. Greet your enemies. This is a simple way we often overlook. One part of loving our enemies is to greet them graciously when we see them. Sometimes, very often perhaps, instead of turning the other cheek, we turn the whole body away so we won't have to say hello to someone who has hurt us. Some of us have been quite adept at looking the other way, ducking into another room, crossing to the other side of the street, even using caller ID to keep from greeting those who have hurt us. But if we only greet our friends, what benefit is that? Do not even sinners greet each other? One part of loving your enemies is to greet them instead of avoiding them. How do we love our enemies? Greet your enemies. Number two, disarm them. That's what you do when you turn the other cheek or you go the second mile. You disarm them by doing the very thing they least expect. Disarm them. How do we love our enemies? Do good to them. It's fascinating that both times in this passage of Scripture, when Jesus says, love your enemies, he follows it immediately by saying, do good to them, so that we won't miss the point. Doing good to your enemies means seeing beyond your pain and their meanness to their humanity. It means seeing them as people made in the image of God and understanding that there is something twisted inside that causes all of us to do the nasty things we do. Doing good means that you do what will promote their healing despite the way they've treated you. The idea is you make the first move, you send the email, you pick up the phone, you make the contact, you bridge the gap, you set up the appointment. Do good to them. How do we love our enemies? Number 4, we refuse to speak evil of them. That's what Jesus meant when he said, bless those who curse you. It means that you refuse to think evil thoughts and you refuse to speak evil words against those who have wronged you. Proverbs has a great deal to say about the power of our words. Proverbs 18:21 tells us the tongue has has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Every time we open our mouth, life or death comes out. I am increasingly impressed with this thought. Forgiveness, in many cases, is not possible because we won't stop talking. As long as we talk over and over again about how others have hurt us, we will never find the strength to forgive. At some point, you've got to stop talking and start forgiving. How do we forgive our enemies? Number 5, thank God for them. If you have an honest to goodness enemy, you should thank God for them every day. If you believe in the sovereignty of God, you must believe that your enemy is sent to you by God's design and by God's approval. Your enemy could not torment you apart from God's permission. Behind your enemy stands the hand of God, and God would never permit it if he did not intend to bring something good out of it. You should take a picture of your enemy, frame it, put it where you can see it every day, and thank God for your enemy every time you look at that picture. How do we forgive our enemies? Number 6, you pray for them. I read about Martin Niemöller, a German pastor who was arrested by the Nazis in World War II, who prayed daily from his prison cell for his captors. Other prisoners asked him why he prayed for his enemies, those people who had wronged him. His reply was, do you know of anyone who needs your prayers more than your enemies? But what if you hate that person you're praying for? Tell that to the Lord. It won't surprise him. He'll not be surprised. Then say something like this, Lord, I hate this individual. but you already know that. I ask you to love this person through me because I can't do it on my own power. I ask you for a love that I don't have and can't begin to produce. God will not turn you away when you come with an honest heart, admitting that you need his love to flow through you. How do we love our enemies? Finally, number 7, ask God to bless them. Here's a simple way to do that. When faced with someone who has mistreated you, ask God to do for them what you want God to do for you. Seek the blessing for them that you want God to do for you. Think of it this way. The greater the hurt, the greater the potential blessing that will come when we finally forgive and by God's grace bless those who curse us. Let me offer one final word here. Your enemy is a gift from God to you. And though you don't know it and often can't see it, the person who has hurt you so deeply is a gift from God. To say that is not to excuse evil or to condone mistreatment of others. It is to say exactly what Joseph in the Old Testament meant when he said to his brothers, "You meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good." Our enemies humble us. They keep us on our knees. They reveal our weaknesses. They expose our total need for God. And just as David needed Saul to pursue him and persecute him and repeatedly attempt to kill him, we need the enemies God sends to us as well. If we don't need them, he wouldn't send them. Therefore, we thank God who knows best, and we love our enemies the best way we can. Often God raises up an enemy to see if we really want to be like Jesus. If that is really the desire of our hearts, he will keep our enemy alive and well as long as we need them. In 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. preached on loving your enemies at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. As he came to the end of his sermon, he said, "There's a little tree planted on a little hill, and on that tree hangs the most influential person who ever came into this world. In the cross of Jesus Christ, the love of God has broken through into human history. Now we know what love looks like in a world that's filled with hatred and distrust, bitterness, pain, and mistreatment and abuse." The hymn writer said, see from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down." It's a message from God that love is the only way. It's the only way to heaven. It's the only way to live on this earth. If we believe in Jesus at all, we must say to our enemies, "I love you. I'd rather die than hate you." When Jesus walks with us, we will find the strength to love our enemies, to bless those who curse us, to pray for those who despitefully use us. Well, this is the close to this sermon series on total forgiveness. I hope it's been a healing experience for all of us. When R.T. Kendall wrote the book Total Forgiveness, he mentioned a song called "Let the Past Be the Past at Last." That's the beauty of forgiveness. When we learn to forgive and be forgiven, the past can be the past at last. Forgiveness is always beneficial to us because it sets us free from fear and guilt and sets us free from anger and bitterness so that we can get on with life. It's a transforming gift from God, forgiveness. God, who has forgiven us in Jesus Christ, now teaches us to walk in forgiving love toward one another. Let the past be the past at last. Amen. God bless. Have a wonderful long weekend. Join us again tomorrow for the short devotionals, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and next week for the Sunday morning sermon from Black Rock Baptist Church. Until then, let's continue to exchange prayers daily. Have a wonderful weekend.